Thanks for the introduction. So when I found out I was going to do a bit of a talk, I thought the first thing you have to do is come up with a really catchy title that's ambiguous, that draws people in. So I call it Predicting the Unknown, and this is about how estimating bugs leads to improved delivery. First of all, I'll jump a little bit about me. I've since dyed my hair since this last photo, but generally I'm a pinky purple glittery person. My background is in a mixture of e-commerce and VOD. So I started off with salmon, working with brands like Ted Baker, Next, and Net-a-Porter. Moved on to do some global logistic operations for a company called Globalix. I then started my own kind of mobile app startup and ran that for a while before moving back into e-commerce, working with Liquitex, Snazaroo, and Winsor & Newton, which are like really big art brands. Then moved over to Osmodern, which is a VOD platform CMS that supported the launches of Equinox, their online platform, Sky's project in New Zealand, and working with the TV Academy. So like doing the Emmy Awards, that was really fun. And I'm relatively new at Discovery. So I'm only been at Discovery for about 6 weeks now, kind of bringing the me to Discovery. I'm a poet. And Discovery Plus, just as a little bit of a plug, Discovery Plus is out now on Sky Q. It's really cool. Check it out. So why do I love data and talk about data? I always think it's interesting to know the people behind the data. And I've always liked solving problems, always been a bit into maths, a bit into physics. And then I went and did a psychology degree where basically you do like 60% books and 40% lots of interpretation of data with really advanced data skills. So I kind of had data driven in me growing up. And then I also play music in a band. And at the moment, when you're doing music, data is just as important as music. So having an understanding of who your listeners are, when they listen, how to advertise against them is just as important as actually having a good song. So, that they're the kind of the drivers for data. And I still think there's a lot of value to be found in collating and analysing the data. And personally, I'm always I like adding value. I don't really like just kind of doing a job to turn a 2 into a 3. I like to be really involved and passionate. And that's the background to that. So just some high-level uses of data in agile projects. I'm sure people have seen stuff. So a common one is measuring the capacity, which is the velocity of story points. I've seen them used for measuring quality. I've seen them to be able to use for delivering, roadmaps. This roadmap feels like an 80 story points. Let's map that. And predicting the unknown, which is what I'm going to talk about, which fundamentally is story pointing bugs. I apologize in advance. The rest of this kind of assumes that the audience here would know story points. If not, please feel free to put in the chat and I can do a little bit of a summary of that. But fundamentally, everything from here on in is the concepts of story points. So what kind of problem is this kind of trying to solve? So the situation that I found myself in across a couple of teams is that you have a development, and I like Bugs Life as a film. So talking about bugs, I've just got a load of screenshots from Bugs Life. Hopefully you've seen Bugs Life and will follow along. That's just a little bit of me. So the development team are estimating work using story points. And often in the delivery manager or scrum master is measuring the velocity, normally to try and assess the capacity of the team, what you want to put into a sprint or a period of 4 weeks if you're doing Kanban. And what we often found is that the same development team that fixes the bugs as working on new features. And then those bugs both vary in the amount you get a month and also the complexity. So basically when they're worked alongside, the bugs are not story pointed, but the story points are. And even though you're spending effort on bugs and you kind of get an up and down graph, a little bit like what Roz was speaking about before. So how does that look and impact? I wish I had a graph that looked like Roz's. I think if I ever do this again, it'll look like that. But so then what happens is a delivery manager says, our velocity in X period was 50 story points, and we only had one bug in that period. So the team will say, okay, let's commit to 40 story points because the bugs always take up some of our time, and that way we've got space to work on any bugs that come up. And then what happens, if 3 big bugs pop up, and it's difficult to assess the impact of those. Obviously, if they're P0s, P1s, drop everything, the website's down, checkout doesn't work, you can't play content in Italy, all those kind of things come up. With just a fix it attitude, with no ability to quickly assess the impact of that to delivery. So then what you get is like the bugs take longer than expected. In verbal communications, how long will it take a little bit of time. So the bugs take longer than expected, and the team actually delivers 35 points. And then you kind of get this impact where the product team starts to lose confidence in tech's ability to deliver a little bit. And then team morale drops when the team sees a little bit of a dip in the graph and they wonder why it's not. And is it them? And it doesn't help, that kind of stuff. And then what usually happens is you start the cycle again. So you hope for less bugs last time. Maybe we can manage it a little bit better. Maybe you look at the support process, but you kind of leave, in a lot of places, you kind of leave the fact that that unknown work is unknown. So how have I been solving it? Basically, story pointing bugs. And I know it goes against a lot of the philosophy of some stuff. Hopefully, I'll convince you by the end of this presentation that it's worth doing. So you do the same story as you still do the same process as estimating stories. And yes, some bugs are vague, and some have more detail, and the solution is clearer. You'll have bugs that says website's down. Why? Although in my experience, normally at that point, there's a really clear reason why that's down, and you've got to do some work. And some is the logo in the top right is too big, or on Safari, the bug on the player goes over too much. So actually, it's very similar to level of scope to a normal story. Just perhaps you don't have the designs nice, and maybe the acceptance criteria isn't as fleshed out. So you really estimate the bugs to the best of the team's knowledge at the time, and then you work as normal. So after the first couple of times, they can see what is a big, small, and large bug. So while that happens, until you've got the data, you kind of just need to keep track. And what I would be doing is I then make visible the average size of the bug, the average amount of bugs that we're getting a month, and then show the variance between the big and the small. So when someone says, this feels like a really quick bug, or this feels like a really big bug, you can start to have some actually quantitative estimates of what that should look like. And then you've got to give it time. It seems to be, in my experience, 2 to 4 months, depending on how many tickets you get through. But that seems to be the sweet spot where the data starts to be looking, about right. And when you introduce this to teams, there are obviously a little bit of concerns, mainly because most people have been heard don't story point bugs. And we don't know how to solve this, so how can I estimate it? There's a line of, there's enough detail by the time it's got to a bug to probably know that, and you embrace the ambiguity. There's no other option but to embrace the ambiguity. You also maybe hear, we haven't got time to estimate this, it's a P0. While there may be some merit in that, I think often it doesn't take more than a minute to estimate put a quick estimate on a bug, and that can really help. A lot of I think you'll see the value pays off just for doing that. Will this data be used to punish me? I'm sure you've heard this with using story points for teams. No, it's not about you solve bugs slower than that. It's none of that kind of stuff. It's all about just getting the right capacity. And every now and again, if you've got a really good team morale, and everyone's a bit stressed, they might have that one person who makes a quick joke. It's a story point, that Fibonacci thing, and if you get that 9 times out of 10, they're just trying to wind you up. So, and if not, you could always quickly refresh. I've done a couple of refreshes with teams that takes 10 to 15 minutes, so it's normally not too bad. So then so what's when you come to doing the data analysis and story points, what do you do? So I don't know if everyone's aware, but there's a brilliant free add-on called Jira for Google Sheets, and it basically just does a pull of all your Jira data for free into Google Sheets, which means you can basically play with it like Excel, which is great. So in our scenario that we're creating up, the data would show that the average bug raised was a 3, and the variance between that was like a 2, and the big ones were 5s. So we kind of had an idea that then the small bugs were 2s, an average bug was a 3, and anything that's a big bug would be a 5. We also saw that the team had an average of 4 bugs a month to deal with, give or take. And therefore, we know it's likely that we have to make space for 4 bugs in next month, or if you're doing next sprints, or however you'd like to arrange your work, but the space you can then make for that. You're predicting the unknown. So then what happens now in the solution-wise is then the delivery manager is reporting the velocities increased to 65, because what you're now doing is you're story pointing your bugs. You expect a bit of an increase in velocity. So the team says, okay, well, we know that we're going to probably have to have a few bugs, so we'll commit to 53 points, And that means that the bugs that are probably going to come up, we can have space to work on and still hit that kind of 65 velocity and keep a nice flat graph in an ideal world. Another throwback to Roz. Hope that's okay. So then what happens is, in this scenario, 3 big bugs are raised. So we go, whoa, okay, thanks for raising them. We'll get the team set on them. We think this is going to be 15 points. So I've been lucky enough to always work with a product owner. So you've got 3 more points that you need to take out, basically. So you can very quickly in the same conversation say, all right, okay, which ticket comes out of there? What can we live with? And then they can escalate to the stakeholders the impact. So, very quickly that they can say, well, we had a big outage yesterday. We know it's going to be about 15 points. Therefore, this one story isn't going to get done, but we're letting you know a week in advance rather than the day before. And what happens is the team delivers the points, and the retro feedback set comes down to some bugs being super big. So you kind of get that feedback loop again. And then, just to continue that, so what we found is then the conversation doesn't become, oh, there's been a big drop in velocity. You actually get like the team morale normally like get bands together and rises and becomes like, yeah, do you remember that bug? Oh yeah, well, you can see it in the data. Look at that spike. That's because we dealt with 3 big bugs or whatever. You can have those kind of conversations with the team. It helps the product team to clearly understand the reasons for delays. I think as the product team kind of matures, depending on who you've got, not everyone understands like bugs probably going to be raised. Those things take time and they have complexity. So that when they're part of that decision and they can really clearly see what the impact of bugs are quickly, it helps them make decisions, at least have the ability to make decisions as the bugs arise. And now when setting deadlines and planning roadmaps, we don't kind of have to just add 10% contingency or always kind of plan for bugs. We can predict the unknown and we can plan for it. And we can, as a result, dates tend to become more realistic. The roadmap becomes deliverable. And that's because you've now got, when you estimate bugs, you've kind of got a true vision on capacity, whereas before they were a little bit hidden with bugs. Now you've got a true vision of that and you kind of know where you are. And there's less last minute panic, tends to be less stress and certainly less forced overtime because you're normally tracking a burn down. You can make the decisions often quickly enough. So that by the time any really hard deadlines get there, you've normally been able to escalate early enough. And this is generally good for both teams and the stakeholders. So like impact is the projects that I had. So I first tried this idea and went on a project that was dealing with a lot of bugs and a lot of stories, and it landed on the deadline day. And it tracked pretty closely to the burn down all the way through. And we found that as bugs arose, the product would constantly prioritizing. So I feel like there was more reprioritizing as a result of this and more prioritizing with context of what they need to deliver, both before and after launch. And it was really good that if dates looked like they were slipping, we could discuss it knowing the unknowns. And I think at one point we said, right, if any bugs come up in the last 2 weeks, we need another team to handle these totally. Because even though they might be slower, we won't hit our deadlines. We could have those conversations. And then since this, I've done another 4 project deadlines at 2 different companies, and they landed on time using this approach. And that's both across e-commerce and VOD. So I don't think it's like a domain specific. It looks to me like once you kind of teach the devs and everyone gets comfortable with the approach, it kind of make that variance gets thinner, which is really good. And I don't know whether I'm just really lucky, but the teams that we've done this in seem to be really happy, really high performing, always getting a lot out of it. And interestingly, and a retro action was to show more data and to regularly discuss this in the start of our retros. So since then, the first 5 minutes of the retrospective is us looking at a really quick data snapshot of where we are, what we're doing. And the questions that get asked of that are really interesting. So like, how can I do this? What is that? And it depends on your team, but it's really quite interesting. Certainly for me as a bit of a data nerd. And what the most shocking thing that I found was the wider business impact. So I was running a team, the team bought into the methodology, we'd had all this, doing all the user ceremonies, all the feedbacks. And while database decisions became the norm for delivery, what was interesting is that the language traveled through to the product and the account management teams. So all of a sudden, because we were showing that the data could be predicted and delivered and the team was happy, and I think the comments were things like, that team always looks happy, they always seem to deliver. Everyone else started saying, well, what data do we have that we can use? How can we adapt that kind of stuff? a little bit of a shock to me, but I thought it was really good. And the product found that roadmaps could be put together with a lot more reasonable amount of confidence and the more planning than just adding 10%. And then the impact of bugs to delivery dates was clearly shown. So I think at one point we had a project and the client moved the deadline back by a month due to we were solving bugs. And we were able to say, well, yeah, if we do 20 bugs, it's going to take this amount of time. And that was really helpful. And also QA used it to make strong arguments for new tools. So say, well, if we have less bugs, then we can maybe reduce the impact by this. I'm not a QA lead. I don't fully remember all the insights that they had, but basically the QA lead was able to do some really cool stuff and make a strong argument for investing in new tools. And yeah, fundamentally, it helps the product to understand what can and can't be delivered and why. So it kind of smooths out those lines a little bit. So if you're looking for a cheat sheet on how to predict the unknown, the biggest thing I could recommend is the free Jira Clouds for Sheets. Google. It's not as easy to say as it is to read. The Jira Cloud for Sheets, Google Sheets integration, and you do that and make a couple of pivot tables, make a couple of graphs, and they update in real time. So you're constantly getting that information and make it as visible as you can, as early as you can. So try and do it at least in retros. And you have to embrace the ambiguity of the bug. So yes, it's not going to be a perfect story. Yes, there will be, potentially wide variances at first in the bugs, but I think you just got to embrace that. And one of the really important things is make sure there's a feedback loop to the development team. They need to see the bugs, the impact of the data, hopefully become inquisitive and ask why they do this, and understand that all this is to protect them. If we fully know their capacity, we can make sure that they're happy, they work on the right kind of things, they're not overworked, the requests of them are realistic, and when the requests from them are stretching, we can acknowledge that and put things in place to help them. And then you kind of end up going a little bit wild, and you start using data to drive as many decisions as you can. So you go delivery dates, then you look at quality, then you want your road mapping, then you wonder whether your on-call support could benefit that to balance out. And the list goes on. Anyway, I'm sure you can imagine using data, perhaps in these story point, this one or two things might stand out to you. But yeah, and that's the little flick of the animation. It feels like a very proud cheat sheet. So yeah, has anyone got any questions? There you go. Thank you for having me. Hopefully that's been clear.
Thanks, James. Really, really appreciate that, and some interesting points that you raised. So yeah, we've got a question from Sonic. Great username. He says, "How do you treat spikes, and does the complexity points on a bug cover the time it takes to research it?"
What was that again? Sorry, I missed the first bit.
No worries. So he says, "How do you treat spikes, and does the complexity point on a bug cover the time it takes to research it?"
Yeah, I think they're two good questions. So spikes, I wouldn't story point. They are the last little bit of variance that you could do. I guess if you wanted to take this to its nth degree, you could story point spikes. That would be an interesting concept. I'm sure some developers could do that. And in a story point, I personally believe that when you're story pointing, when you adjust for QA, it's for that QA fail back and forth that's in the one ticket, not for any future things that come in, because basically it just doesn't help make decisions, really. There's too much ambiguity for that point. So although you have to change your thinking a little bit, if you say, oh, this might go back and forth between QA and in progress a few times, all right, that's probably a higher point. But then anything new comes in is new work. Often the developer won't have just finished working it. It's 15 minutes to sit and understand it. It's got to, git, check out, blah, blah, blah. There's enough effort in that they should be story pointed to, in my opinion. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah. We'll open it up to the other panelists if they have any questions they'd like to ask. We'll go with Rosalind first. Do you have any questions you'd like to ask James?
Yeah, you touched a little bit on what the QA on the team was doing with the data to kind of get the better tools. Was there anything that the team were using the data for as well to sort of reflect on what was causing the bugs and improvements to the processes, ways of working?
Alongside the data, yeah, we were also doing the Spotify health checks things at the same time. So you kind of look at it all as one big picture. But I think the team were mainly interested in, because when we had a few new people who you were training in, what is a story point, why you do it, why do we have these estimation sessions? It helped them really see that, a couple of the times we were pushing back on clients to say, we haven't got capacity, and we know this because here's our 4 months of capacity, and we estimate nearly everything that goes into it. And they saw the value of that and felt a bit more protected, maybe. Although that never really came out, that would be my guess. They felt protected from that. And it was maybe I'm just lucky enough to work with really good, engaging, high-performing teams, but that certainly seemed to be in that kind of vibe to me.
Thanks.
And yeah, but finally we'll go to Claudia, Maria, if they have any questions they'd like to ask James.
Yeah, I've got one. Thanks, James. That was really great. It actually kind of resonates because it was only recently that I was having a similar conversation with some new engineers about why we estimate story point bugs. I guess, as you mentioned, like they're planned and your team, it kind of helps boost the team morale to know they know what's coming in and you can prioritize. Has there ever been a case where like you've had a red ship that's come in that exceeds the story points that you've planned for, and how the team kind of, I guess, adapt to that?
Nothing that stands out, I'm afraid. I wish I had a story that I could tell. I guess the biggest thing would be like the examples where you kind of had I think we had 3 P0s in one day at one point, and that obviously just hits you hard. And that was where the tickets had to be a bit reprioritized, but nothing to the point of like, we thought this was a 2, it's actually a 13 that we hadn't already raised. The team were quite good at when they found 2s, they would kind of, very quickly in progress, if they believed it was an 8, not a 2, they would change it. We'd speak to us and change it, and then we'd make it, again, simple as refresh tab, all the dashboards update with that Jira Clouds thing, and then you've got an instant view really quickly.
Cool, thank you.
It's all
right. Just before we go to a few final questions, I just wanted to pass it to Claudia if she had any questions she'd like to ask.
Yeah, thank you. My main thing is for your success rate that you've had, which is pretty impressive. How experienced?
Don't jinx it.
How experienced are your teams who are doing this? Because it's something that like my team are very new. We haven't fully embraced story points yet. But have your teams been really experienced? And also, are they fully engineers or are they cross-functional teams?
So the teams for these data were largely front end and back end as different people. So not like the full stack, I guess. And what was the other part of the question was, experience. I would say generally on your criteria, they're probably a mixture of experts, and adjumediates, whatever. So I guess maybe one person, maybe 1 or 2 were kind of new, where I think the concept of story points was new to most people in this scenario. So story points was a ground up, so I had the ability to shape that. But in terms of working in an agile way in sprints and delivering and kind of knowing that a Jira ticket is an item of work, yeah, generally I would say the team was, if I had to make it a split, probably 10% newbies,
okay,
20%, 30% at the adjumediates, and then whatever the remaining percentages, my maths has gone, whatever that remaining percentages is the experts.
Great, thank you.
No problem.
And just to finish off, James, we just got some questions from the comment section. So apologies if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. Gregorio says, how does team capability and stability affect bug story points?
I think it can do. Obviously, if team stability in terms of people coming in and out of the project, it does affect the story points in terms of getting everyone on the same page. What I'm very lucky at Discovery, I've been able to analyze some big data. So in the past, where I've been kind of talking about 200 to 300 data points, because of this pure size of Discovery, I've been able to look at 4,000 to 5,000 different data points. And the variance isn't as big as you'd think to worry about. It's all like, you've got a bigger chance of someone getting a cold, throwing out your points than that kind of stuff. So although it probably does, not negligible enough to change anything plans or change an approach. And I think team capability certainly does, but I would believe that's part of my role is to assess the team capability and to communicate it. I'm not going to tell anyone how to suck eggs, I think is the expression, but at the same time, make sure that we're all on the same page. Or if they need to, then I've had like sessions where you have to sit everyone down and say, right, okay, we're going to do a story point exercise now. How many story points do you spend in meetings a day? And everyone kind of starts thinking in this concept. And within 10, 15 minutes, you find the consistency in those planning poker stuff comes out. So you have to understand team's capability, but to do enough of the basic training, if you're kind of experienced in that kind of stuff, isn't a large process. Probably a day and 2 or 3 weeks of just being consistent. The hardest bit from team capability side is just being a bit like not like the timesheet police, but for story points. Oh, can you add a story point to this? Oh, can you add a story point to this? For like the 2 weeks until that feedback loop of the data comes through, it is a little bit pulling teeth at times. But when once they see it and see the data and see that you're talking to the senior stakeholders using that data to protect them, they kind of get it from that perspective.
Cool. And last 2 questions, and before we wrap up.
2 questions.
Yeah.
Wow. Giselle, I would have got a bigger box.
Everybody's everybody's very, very intrigued. How Ed asks, how do you estimate longer periods of work with story points? And he says, for us, we go into lots of detail to provide points. I think in longer periods of work, we would split stuff out into epics, and then kind of, I don't know about, so when we split things, also no story should be bigger than an 8 is one of the consistent rules. And I think that the right level is about getting the right level of detail. The thing that sticks out for me, which, sorry, Ed, it's a bit of a RC answer, but in that Agile manifesto is like working stuff over comprehensive documentation. So that word comprehensive really stands out to me, where, with the team, we get the right level of detail that they feel like they need to work on stuff, and not over the verbose, really. But yeah, we have epics, split them down, do a few planning sessions, split into story points, big sessions. Recently, on a project at Discovery, I got everyone together for a day, and we had the requirements, and we spent about 4 hours breaking it down. But the benefit of that is I then built the dashboard, press refresh, and was able to go to senior stakeholders straight away with insights about how this project was going to look, what the stuff there, and so by doing it that way, you get quite a good insight. But it's certainly worth doing the upfront time. I wouldn't change the upfront time, really. It's really good. That's kind of like 5 answers in one, Ed. I'm really sorry. Feel free to reach out to us after, and I'll try and, if I've got that wrong, I'll try and explain better. And final question from Julie. She asks, have you ever worked in a company that had delivery dates driven by sales, i.e. the sales team are promising a client that a new feature will be delivered by X date without speaking to the product team first?
Yeah, a little bit of that. Twice, Julie. Once was in more like when I was doing agile logistics stuff, which doesn't really have much merit here. And the second time was the Osmodin is like a design agency, and they have aspects of that. Certainly, and I don't think it's the sales teams are promising a client that a new feature. It's kind of like the sales team are showing the roadmap, and you have to, just the communication line at the time between product, roadmap, and sales wasn't perfect. But as we went through this process, we realized that what we were thinking was going to land in Q2 next year actually had no chance of landing by Q4 just because of the pure capacity of these kind of things. So I haven't worked in one purely driven by sales, but I guess I've worked in agencies that have contracts with delivery dates. So in that way, and actually they found that when in the T&M concept of paying for sprints or whatever, they found the ability, they knew what capacity they were paying for was better for them than, like, it might be 50, might be 35, might be 70, who knows? Give us all your money. Great, thanks. Look at my new Porsche. You could say, right, well, this probably gets you 60 odd points. We've got a product owner who's going to get what you think into that 60 bucket. It may be 63, it may be 58, but we'll be working on stuff for you, and you have a lot less variance in that. Another long-winded answer. I need to learn how to stop talking. But hopefully that helps, Julie.
No, it does. Thank you.